All right, this is a class about greeting. How we do it formally at the door of the church, but also how each individual member of the church, worshiper there, can be part of the greeting team, whether you formally sign up, but what you might do. So the epistle lesson ended this morning from 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 5. Be steady, endure suffering, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill your ministry. Now, my question to you is, to whom was Paul writing that? Let me mention again, in Paul's second letter to Timothy, the 4th chapter, the 5th verse, might I ask, to whom was Paul addressing that comment?
Timothy?
And if Timothy? No, Timothy received the letter. Now, if I've ever asked you a question, is it a straight answer that you would expect, or is there a trick to this? There may well be a trick, and therefore think again. To whom is this directed?
All of us.
Ta-da! To all of us. My point being, where did Timothy go to seminary? He didn't. So he was a layperson. So that's y'all. Many times we think of evangelism as the work of pastors or evangelists or missionaries. In reality, it is the work of disciples. Christ gives us the mandate, the Great Commission, to go and make disciples. None of the persons who heard that were pastors. They were disciples. And the disciples grabbed onto that, and it was kind of an understanding. Who makes disciples? God. Who does he use to make them? Other disciples. So disciples make disciples. If you were to leave it all in the hands of the pastors, I did not look up on Google how many pastors there are in the world. Let it suffice to say we don't have enough. If we are going to get the message to all nations, it cannot be pastors that do it. We have our responsibility, and to be really honest, there's not a person in this room who has fewer friends than I do outside this church. You know your neighbors, you've got contacts. I have y'all, and you all are still connected to this church. So we gather about the gospel in church on Sunday, and the pastors proclaim the good news. But the work of evangelism, the mandate, the Great Commission being done is dependent on you. Now, sometimes that can be done best in church, especially when somebody comes. Anybody around the church long enough to remember when we did not do the greeting at the beginning of the service? That was a really long time ago. Now, I started it. I just had nothing better to do that day, so I said, I'm going to read some of the bulletin to you and ask you then to greet one another. You think that's what happened? No, there's intention. Honestly, there really is intentionality. It'd be fun for you to test me and say, why do we do this? Why is there that delay to distribute communion when the wine and the pastor could have done that earlier? Why is he doing it just before the words of institution? Just after the offering is brought forward. There's a liturgical reason for that. In the early church, bread and wine was brought for the poor and left at the back of the church. And when it came time for communion, some of the bread and wine was brought forward. And it's a symbol of offering thanks to God for the gifts that he gives us of bread and wine, which now become for us the body and blood of Christ. So there is intentionality. Where did this idea of reading some of the announcements and greeting one another come from? We had a visitor who came to church. First time, she signed in. Greeter caught her and she signed in, and I went to see her at her apartment. And she was not a Lutheran by background, didn't know much about Lutherans at all, except what she learned from the chaplain in the military, who was a Lutheran. And so when she got out of the military, dumped here in Jacksonville, she came, there's a Lutheran church, she came over to our church. And I said, well, I hope you enjoyed it, because they use non-denominational liturgy in the military. I hope you got along and enjoyed it. He said, well, yeah, it was all right. And I said, all right. Any challenges? He said, well, to be really honest, and I'm down to earth enough that people can be honest with me sometimes. She said, well, actually, when I came, I was greeted at the door. Somebody welcomed me there. They shook hands with me. The only other time anyone said anything to me or touched me was you as I was exiting the church. Now, in truth, our liturgy is very much front to back. You talk to the pastor up front, pastor talks to you. We're listening to God speaking from the Word to us, back, forth. And I guess nobody shared the peace with her that day either. But there was no side to side. So she didn't feel embraced by the community. She observed what the community did, and she was outside of it. Another really terrible example, I got a letter from a visitor, lived down South Florida, and this was an older gentleman, and had a walker, and sat in the usher seats at the back, which have to be the worst seats in the church. They are under the balcony. The sound is not the same, and you are away from the rest of the worshipers. So really, back there, you are an observer to worship. You are not participating. Well, he wrote a scathing letter of how unfriendly our church was. How just out of it he felt, and I feel sorry for you guys, and hope that God can correct your problems. It was a vicious letter. Now, I, of course, went on, and he put down his church name and all that, and I went to look at the church. And that year, in his church, South Florida, they actually had 12 people who joined the church. So they were at least welcoming people. That year, we had 147 people join our congregation. But the point is, he was not greeted. Neither the woman nor he felt embraced by the community. So we can't counteract. I mean, we're trying the best we can to preach sermons that are based on the Word. We set up greeters. We have formal ways of doing this. But if the congregation is not aware of the impact you have, then we're going to do a disservice to the mandate that Christ gave us to go and make disciples. The Sunday after the woman came and I met with her is the Sunday we began doing greeting in church. I swore to myself we would never again have somebody visit our congregation who was not greeted by more than the person who was clearly slated to do it. That was their job. And the pastor with a collar, of course, that was his job. But when you all do it, it's like waving. When I'm out waving at cars, I got a collar on or I got my robes. They would expect me to be there. When you all are there waving, that's a statement about what you believe. Not what you have to do, but what you get to do. And that really makes a witness. Last, a particular story. Any of you remember a guy named Fred Zirk? He was a big guy. Anyway, one day at church, a long time ago, Fred came in midway through the service. He was late. He came, and the greeters were done, and they were in worship already. And the usher was still there. And the usher became a greeter and greeted him, brought him in. He had not been in church for 42 years. You want to guess the last Sunday he was there? What Sunday was it?
Confirmation.
It was confirmation.
I was at the service last night.
That was the saddest.
Oh, you heard all this
Yes.
before.
Yes. And so, yeah, don't answer too much, Carol. I'm sure you were paying attention last night. So Fred Zirk had not been in church 42 years, doesn't know anything about the liturgy, didn't know how to commune, hadn't communed, got communion once in the old days. When you're confirmed, you got communion. So he had communed once in 42 years. And but Tim, the usher, guided him through the service, sat with him, helped him find his place, assisted him with, and afterwards came down to fellowship. And I spoke with him a little bit, and he was a big guy, I'm a little guy, and so we talked and everything. Well, the next week I don't see Fred. And I felt, okay, maybe once every 42 years Fred's going to be around. And the next week, I saw him in church, and as I was heading down to fellowship, one of the secretaries, I said, "Oh, I got a pink slip, and it's Fred Zirk, and he says he wants to join." So I go to meet Fred. And again, I'm practicing to be a pastor. You have to work really hard because, I went up to him and I said, "Fred, it's so good to see you. I'm glad you made it back this week." And he said, "Well, I was here last week." And I said, like a New Yorker, "Not for nothing, Fred, but I would have noticed." I mean, yeah, here I'm talking to a new member, calling him a liar. But I said, "Fred, I would have noticed if you were in here last week." And he said, "No, I didn't make it in." I said, "You didn't make it in?" He said, "No. I came earlier this week because I was late last week. So I wanted to make sure I could get in." So I came, and he has a big dually truck. And in that day and age, we had 3 services, and the middle service stayed for fellowship afterwards and Bible studies and everything else. And Fred came and sat there with his truck and couldn't get a parking spot and finally gave up. Do you know one of the reasons we have the Lakeshore? Do you know one of the reasons that we voted to sell this property? Because we were no longer effective as the mission of Christ in the world. This place could no longer fulfill the Great Commission. And so we put it up for sale. Fred ultimately did join the congregation and served here as long as he was around, and then got transferred. So, because that usher took that time, people, let me ask you, why do you think people come to church? Let me give you a multiple choice. We have very little time. Number one, they have nothing better to do on a Sunday. Number two, they're just bored with life and they went from there to the movie theater. Or there is some precipitating event. I don't want to be too highfalutin, but something has happened. Something is going on. I mean, it can be as extreme as they lost a loved one, or they had a baby and are going nuts, or they want a baptism. We don't know, but something has happened. Sometimes visitors will actually, the first time when they do studies on these people, say, "Well, what was your process getting into church?" I said, "Well, on the 3rd week, I went into the church." And the interviewer would say, what did you do the first 2 weeks?" "I couldn't get out of the car. I sat in the parking lot. I'm trying to observe the people going in, wondering if they look like friendly people, or I have no idea. I don't know what a Lutheran is, much less a Lutheran church. So I have no idea what's happening inside those walls. So it's really scary to go in." So they walk into church, and we have a formal person excuse me, at the door, some of whom Gretchen does, one of our great witnesses, Joanne, great witness, Carol does great, extroverted kind of people, and they can do it and encourage them gently better than I could. I just say, "Sign here or you get no communion," which is not good, because we want to get their address. We want that. Now, you can understand why a visitor doesn't want to sign the very first thing they walk in the door. We have no idea what these people are going to do to me, or whether I want them to know where I'm from or anything else. And so, in addition, we have the registry in the pew. That's why it's there, because a percentage are not going to sign in at the front door. And once they go through worship and feel comfortable and think we're not totally nuts, they may well sign it. If they sign it, we pastors follow up. We go to their apartments. We try to track. If we get the address, we will go to them and try to hold a conversation. How long you been here? But if we don't get that, remember what your mom said about first impressions? The whole first impression is up to you guys. What you do, how you greet them. And the greeter is an important thing at the door. But once, again, like that woman, she got greeted at the door, went in, and nobody said a word. So we've lined up a number of things that you can do, and some I want to point out. Which person, I asked you, who come, why do they come? Who comes back? Why do they come back? If they come for a second visit, why did they do that? What happened the first time? They felt welcomed. They developed a relationship with somebody. Somebody. That's where the welcome comes from. It's not the sign over the door that says welcome. That isn't going to do it. It's when somebody touched them, heart or hand, you greeted them, you embraced them in whatever way you could, and in a variety of ways. If they experience that, they will come back. Because one thing we know about the society, as much as you may have 1,000 friends on Facebook, the number of individuals that people call good friends has been dropping steadily, and it's now less than 2. That's most of the people, not older people like us. The ones who are on Facebook all the time. The social media has replaced interpersonal, where I know somebody in depth and I share with them what's happening in my life. So they got touched by somebody and they come back. So a number of things I want to point out to you, that if you believe me, that you are the first line, you are the people. I may do weird things, and I will do weird things in the pulpit. I will say things that I shouldn't say. I'll tell stories I shouldn't say. But you can make up for it based on how somebody is feeling who is sitting next to you. So how do they get there? Begin number 1. I don't know if you do it. I was Missouri Synod. When we began worship, we come into church. First thing we always did was pray. We prayed. We prayed that God would speak to us from the Word, that our hearts would be open. Add one little thing, if you don't do that, I encourage you to add one more thing, and that is to pray for who might be around you. I'll bet you, most of the people in worship who are members and regular visitors to our church sit in the same place week after week after week. I am not telling you to move. In fact, I'm encouraging you to stay there. That is your sub-church. Right around there, you know the people around you. If they're not there, you might tell us. Mary Jo is always there. Mary Jo wasn't there. We've got 4 services we're tracking. Send us a note and say, I don't know, Pastor, you know what happened to Mary Jo? She wasn't in church. Let us know that. Or maybe, even better, you call them. You call Mary Jo and say, hey, I missed you this morning. Pastors are supposed to do that. You guys, when you do it, it's a sign of the community's care. Okay? Either way, let us know that. If you will, sit in the same place. Secondly, this is going to be hard. I almost bite my tongue saying it, but if you would, sit in the middle of the pew. Where do you want to sit? On the end. Might have to get out for the bathroom, and I might have to leave right at the end of the service. You think the visitors are different from you? Where do they want to sit? Do you think if you're sitting at the end of the row, they're going to say, first time they come in, excuse me, can I walk by and sit in the middle? Not a shot. So if you sit in the middle, they will sit down on what? The registry. It all works together. I'm trying to help you here.
If they come down the center aisle.
If they come, only if, or the side aisles, they're on the end over there. So anyway, if you sit in the middle, then acknowledge them. It's not a major thing. I'm not telling you to tell them the gospel or something in a nutshell. You just say hi, acknowledge them, welcome. It's good to have you here. You may even, it is allowed, shake their hand. Again, I'm telling you that touch is important. You shake their hand. I wouldn't hug them and kiss them, but start with a shake hand, or just hi, it's good to have you here. When the pastor says, please fill out the worship registry, please ask them for it. Or if you're on the end, pass it because you came in late, there's a visitor there. Choose the pew with a visitor and take the worship registry then and pass it to them. You sign it. Put Mary Jo Blue down on there and put, if nothing else, your email address. But you can also put your address, okay? They will do what you do. If 3 members filling out that form put down Bob Jones, Fred Taylor, and Mary Lou Smith, they are not going to put out their address and their zip code and their apartment number and their email. They're not going to do it. So if only when you see a visitor, please, we have visitors who have been around for months and we still cannot make contact with them. They have not yet given us their address, phone number, or email. So, and we're trying to remember who they are. So if you sit, wherever you sit, please do that. Greet them. That's what makes you a greeter. Greet them when they come into the pew. When the service begins, they may not, in the shorthand that we use, please find the green worship booklet in the hymn rack. Now, if they haven't been in church in 42 years, they may not know a hymn rack from a her rack. I'm just telling you, help them. Watch them. If they have not found their way to the book, we can't get them back in the middle of the service if they are not participating from the beginning. So encourage them. Green hymnal, not red hymnal, etc. What page? Little numbers at the bottom of the page are not the hymn numbers. Big ones at the top. Hymn 63. They go to page 63, 202. It's the funeral service. Oh my God, I came to the wrong service. No. The hymn, help them if you would, please. So then as the greeting, you make sure, introduce them to somebody else that you know around you. At the end of the service, instead of being continuously irritated with the pastors who are taking too long greeting people, you have a couple of minutes. Look for somebody you don't know, greet them, just spend a little time. So you say things like, oh, is this your first time at Shepherd of the Woods? We have different services, so I don't know if you've been to the others. Oh, yes, this is my first time. Where are you from? Are you new to Jacksonville? What do you do? You're listening, because then, if you can, get them down to fellowship. You're going to introduce them to somebody from CSX or somebody from the hospital or a medical guy or whatever it is that they've told you. They're not trying to hide it. They made the effort to be here. You don't grill them, but you tactfully try to find out what you can, and then write it down, send a note. That will really help us. We're not, it's not tough for us to make a cold call. Any of you have been salesmen, you know what it's like. We're walking in. It's not exactly, it's a lukewarm cold call, because they came to us. We can go to them, but we got to get that information. At the pew, sharing the peace with one another when they're exiting. Fellowship time is a really crucial time. I think most of you go to fellowship at the end of service. That's a really crucial time for two ways. We may have done everything perfectly well in the service, and now the visitor, upon our encouragement, goes down to fellowship, sits at a table by themselves, or even worse, stands by the coffee. That's where they're going to go. When they have nowhere else to go, they're going to stand by the coffee so they have something in their hand. It's very uncomfortable to be just standing there. At least if I have coffee, I'm doing something. I'm drinking coffee. And what they're doing is scanning around, how do they get out of this room? Because everybody is in cliques. Not everybody caring for each other. That's not what they see. They see groups of people laughing, enjoying each other, talking, and I am here by myself. So if you see them, if you encourage them to come with you, bring them to a table, introduce them to some other people. Find somebody you know, or if you know what kind of job or where they're from, New York or they're Wisconsin or something, find somebody that you know who is able to connect with them. The worst thing, I just tell you honestly, there have been times when I felt like we needed to stop fellowship because of the impact that it had on visitors. I'd greet people at the door. I'd come down there and I'd see a visitor by himself. I'd see one standing by the coffee and no one. I have talked directly to Carol, because Carol she'll talk to anybody, and she's gregarious. And I'll say, Carol, could you do me a favor? See the guy over there? Would you please? Because I get and we got people who are dying, and I know you're caring about them and you want to. But if we don't care for that visitor, the last thing they're going to get is a bad experience in fellowship, and they will not come back. That will chase them away more than anything else. So I ask you to do that. Lastly, please wear your name tag. Wear it on.
Yeah, Marty.
You got this whole lesson just for me, right?
I did.
I think that a lot
It
of
is
us-
I have a. Tom wins. Thank you, Tom. We have relationship with people we know. They don't know us until they know our name. How they can refer to the bald guy with the hair on the sides who is by the door. That could be anybody. Are you kidding? Look, we have 4 people in the room, only 5 men, and only one of us has hair to speak of. So Yes. Oh, somebody greeted me very well. I'd like to give you credit where credit is due. Wear your name tag. If you say to them, "My name is Bob," they're going to say what their name is. If you just say to them, "What's your name?" that's a grilling. But if you're wearing your name tag, it may encourage them. We are saying to them, we wear name tags here. It allows us to know one another. We are about relationships. So wear yours until the last moment when you're going out the door. I will personally make you another name tag if you lose it. When we look on Monday, Norma puts them all back. If any are missing, we make new ones for you. You may make 15, 20, I don't care. For the sake of Fred, for the sake of that young lady, for the sake of the next visitor who walks in this church, I'll make you a dozen name tags. Please care for them as best you can. So introduce yourself to them. Last note about name tags. If it is handwritten, it is likely they are a first-time visitor. That's really important. When you see blue name tags, they are a recent new member. And important to especially introduce yourself to them, because that's a fragile time. If they don't have, the studies indicate, if they don't have 10 friends in 6 months, they will be gone before the year is out. 10 friends in 6 months or within a year, they're gone. So all the work, all the effort is going to be for naught. We are not going to be able to share the good news with them because they're going to leave. What we say in a pulpit cannot counteract a non-welcoming community. So we are good. The guy was wrong, but we know how we've got to deal with that. So ushers, next time you see somebody in your chairs, throw them out. You know, that's the most loving thing you can do. Okay. All right.
I'll wear a name tag from now on.
Thank you. I really
You and
appreciate
Evan.
that. Thank you.
I
Thank you.
would like to share an experience. Jack and I were in Minnesota and went to a Lutheran church. The pastor, when we left, and we went to fellowship, not one person spoke to us. Not one. Not even the pastor. So it does, you know.
So if
And
you
we
had
never went
moved
back
there,
to Minnesota to tell them why we didn't come back, but
but if you had gone back, would you go to that church or try another?
I might try another because there are a lot of Lutheran churches up there.
Yeah.
Well, when I went to a church in New Jersey, the pastor finally came to visit me, and I said, I've met one person. So I described her, and he's laughing, He says, "Well, that's my wife." And I had volunteered for Sunday school, the whole bit. And then when I went to the Methodist church over here, the two people that were handing out bulletins were talking to each other. So they gave me a bulletin, never said hello.
I refused to go to the Starbucks down on 210. I went there 3 times, and every time I walked in, there were like 8 barristers behind a counter, all of whom were talking to each other. I'll only stand there a couple of minutes, and then obviously I am interfering with their conversation, and I left. And now I don't care how much I need a Starbucks, I'm not getting it there. So it's not neutral not to do this greeting. It is repulsive. People just met, like 2 norths coming together, and the person says, all I want to do is get out of this place. And there's no way to make up for that with the visit. That woman, Navy lady, I did all I could, but she would not come back. All right, I thank you very much for your time. Blessings on your greeting. If we can close with a prayer. Heavenly Father, we know your concern for all people, and we know your mandate to us that we would go and make disciples. We pray that you would help us, because we don't always see it and we don't always know how, but we pray that your Spirit would lead us in our care for those who come to this community. Bless us that we would greet them and care for them the way you have cared for us. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.